Okay, so hey everybody. I am Chaz. This is John. We are the Fisher brothers of Fisher Blades, and we're sitting with our good friend Jacob Peterson, just to talk about some stuff, some knife stuff, and maybe some not knife stuff. So,
Yep.
Jacob, why don't you give us a briefing about yourself and what
Yeah.
brought you
So
here?
my name's Jacob. I run a YouTube channel. So if you're watching this on their channel, it's just Jacob Beach Peterson. And I mostly review knives and stuff like that, but I get into some discussions that are pretty far off topic when it comes to that. And I do some tactics stuff, some firearm stuff, being a military guy. But I also own a knife brand, Exodus Knife and Tool, doing production knives, and I have my knives manufactured uh, cool. So we can offer a great price, really high level of quality, and a no questions asked lifetime guarantee. So yeah, that's what I'm doing here, and I'm excited to talk to you guys today.
Cool.
Awesome,
We are too.
cool. Well, like I said, I'm Chaz. This is my brother John. We're with Fisher Blades. We've been around for a couple of years in one form, and then for the last year or so in kind of a new form. And we've been running across you at Blade Show for a couple of years. Had some really good discussions just on the fly in the aisle at Blade Show, and thought it would be cool to sit down with you and talk about knife stuff and go off topic too, because there's some cool ideas that you have that I've heard on your channel. So
Yeah,
I'm psyched to have the discussion.
rock and roll. Well, you know, when it comes to the knife stuff today, we can get in the weeds really quick, and I think that this video will be more educational than what people are expecting, because we're going to talk about why and how stuff actually cuts, right?
Yeah, yeah. My idea was, one of the things I wanted to talk about is just sharp. What sharp means. People talk about, people throw around that term sharp. Is it sharp? There is so much
Yeah.
that goes into sharp. If you don't dig into it, you don't really understand it. You can't really achieve it, or not consistently.
I mean,
Right,
technically, a 90-degree angle can be sharp, but it won't cut very well.
right,
So the
right,
fineness of the edge, the thickness behind the edge, the grind, et cetera, makes all the difference. It's just like, steel and heat treat, like the
right,
forgotten
right,
heat treat.
right,
Everyone talks about the steel. No one talks about the heat treat, which is how you cook it, man. I mean, a whole bunch of ingredients are great, but if you don't cook it really well, it doesn't taste good. So I'm hoping with your extensive knowledge that we can sort of cut through some of the BS and the stuff that's out there and
yeah.
get
Well,
down to some brass tacks.
Hey, wait, Jacob, before you get started, I just want to compliment you on your shirt. Nice choice
Yeah.
yeah,
for flying the colors.
yeah.
Appreciate it.
I love the shirt, guys, and I love the message. Hey, and if I start scratching my arm like crazy, I've got some poison ivy, so it's not like crack or
All
something.
right.
I just it's it's difficult. You mentioned
So
the heat treat, and to some degree, as an industry, we've kind of done that to ourselves because we advertise our steels that we're using, and that's an easy thing to market, but we don't advertise our heat treat. So, people don't talk about heat treat all that often because all they know about heat treat is whether or not people say it's good. And they don't necessarily know what that means. And so we've kind of made it difficult on ourselves to really push the importance of heat treat and consistency because it's not information that we share,
yeah,
but it is so vitally important.
coming from the custom market and learning from Andy Roy and Dirk Lutz and Alan Searles, Joey Barry, among others. I mean, one of the biggest things that they taught me was the heat treat. I mean, that was one of the most intense and extensive kind of learning things that I had with them was the heat treat. But I think you're right. A lot of people, especially in the production side, because I think makers are a little bit more intimate with it. They can kind of see it, feel it, and test it. But on the production side is, we just talk about the latest, greatest steel. Oh,
Right.
it's great steel.
Right.
I used to sail boats. I single-handed my boat most of the way down to Mexico and lived down there on my little boat. And what we would always talk about, me and my sailor friends, were compromises. A boat is a compromise. It can be fast, but maybe uncomfortable. It can be comfortable, but slow, et cetera, et cetera. And steel is exactly the same. It's a compromise of qualities that you get to hopefully serve the purpose of the knife as well as possible. But there is no bad steel in my mind, and there's no perfect steel either.
Right.
And that heat treat and the education of the heat treat is a huge part of that. And I'm sure you've felt that. I mean, the MagnaCut madness, like people think like the steel, it's going to change the way they cut. I would almost defy even experienced knife makers to be able to discern different types of steel and or to tell, explain what they think the hardness is.
I don't know. I think you're wrong. I think maybe elves make it, which makes it magical.
Right.
And so that's why we're paying so much.
Well, and I would agree, outside of the extreme ends of the spectrum, if we were going to compare 1075 to Rex 121, I could drop it and it breaks in half, and I'm like, oh,
yeah,
that's not 1075. But yeah, so and especially when we get into steels that are vastly underrated, that actually have a potential for incredible performance. I would say middle of the road ABL, 14C 28N, even CPM 154 or whatever. These steels might be looked down on. They're boring. They're old school at this point. They're simple, and too many knives are affordable that come in these steels. However, like you said, if I had one knife that was MagnaCut and one knife that was 14C 28N in almost any application, I think across the board, I don't think that the user would ever notice the difference. And I would springboard off of that and say that what the user will notice is two things that ties into what does sharp mean. And one would be handle geometry. Anybody can notice really, really quick when they're really working with a knife, whether that handle works for them or not. And then edge geometry. What does sharp actually mean? Because you can have the coolest, most expensive, most bougie steel in existence, and if your edge geometry is crap, it probably won't matter unless all you're doing is cutting something incredibly thin like paper, at which point all that matters is initial sharpness, which, like you said, could be a 90-degree angle.
Right. It's it's very difficult to educate the sort of common knife user on these subjects. And your talk about the thickness behind the edge really made me revisit that. I have a tendency to make my own personal knives a very thin edge. I like thin edges. I like hard steels, generally, and of course, it matters the steel and all that. But it really made me revisit some of those small aspects for the production knife when we were coming up with it. And these are really crucial decisions to make. And there's not a right and wrong decision necessarily at the extremes, like you mentioned earlier, certainly. But, a softer steel is easy to sharpen.
Yep.
So that can be a great advantage if you're caught out in the middle of nowhere. You don't want a super hard edge because once it goes dull, you're out of luck. But if you have something soft, you could, if you have to, you could get a rock, and hone it up. But what do you think are the most underrated steels out there that maybe have been forgotten? I mean, for me, when I first got into it, 01, I fell in love with 01. The edge that you can get on 01, or that I felt like I could get, I don't think I found another steel that I can get quite the fine edge on. And I
Mhm.
think O1 is an amazing steel for certain applications, but
Right.
it's kind of considered that old tool steel. We're beyond that now. But anyway, go ahead. What do you think?
So I think one thing that I should mention is that there's when we talk about outright potential performance, there's this bar that could be set exceptionally high. But the reason that most people won't notice a difference in things is because we have a par that must be reached for performance. And once you've reached that point, beyond that, people are probably going to start not noticing so much, right?
Right.
And so,
You're talking
like,
general terms, right, Jacob?
right.
Yeah.
So,
General
and like
attributes.
Cliff Stamp, a lot of Cliff Stamp said edge geometry cuts, and edge geometry is toughness, really. So, a couple slept on steels or steels that people look down on. I hate, and it depends on the purpose of the knife. And I like knives that are going to be used pretty hard. So one thing that is really a bummer to me is steels that are looked down on because they are commonly found on affordable knives. I really like and see a huge potential for steels like 420HC and 12C27. Doggone Mora for $7 runs 12C27, but it can be zero ground. It can be
Yep.
Fairly aggressive edge geometry, honestly, a more aggressive edge geometry than almost any other production knife going up to a high price range. And yet it can still take a good bit of abuse.
Yeah.
And so even when it gets dull, that edge geometry is so aggressive and the toughness is there, it can still do some work. So these very simple stainless steels have incredible toughness. 420HC is right up there with CPM 3V. It's very stainless. According to Laren Thomas, it should hold an edge about as well, if not a little bit better than 1095. And it's incredibly easy to sharpen. So I wish we could more commonly break down, like, what does this steel do? What are its potentials? And what do I need like this to pick our steels? But the sad truth of the matter is, if I release a premium knife in 420HC or 12C27, chances are it's not going to sell.
Right. Well,
So,
go ahead.
sorry. So, for especially for larger knives and hard use knives, I really like those steels, and I actually love them in my little pocket knives that I want to be cheap and I don't care that much about. I've got a buck that has very thin edge geometry from the factory. It cuts fantastic. It's in 420HC, and I love using it. And if I were to lose it, I love using it. If I were to lose it or get it stolen, I wouldn't be heartbroken. So a lot of potential there. But even outside of being affordable, I think if custom makers were pushing the boundaries with these steels and using them appropriately, they could perform absolutely fantastically. But it's probably not going to happen because it wouldn't sell. So it's a bad business decision. And at the end of the day, we need to make money. Other steels. I think I wish we saw 1080 series steels used more often. Growing up, talking about knives, more carbon equaled more better. So,
Right.
1075 was a crappy steel, and maybe 1085 was a little better because 80 is higher than 75, but 1095 was the betterest
Right.
because it was the highest number. When in reality, I think for a balance, for almost any application, for a balance of performance, I would go with 1084 every time. I love 1084 as a steel, and we don't see it used very often.
Yeah.
We've got 1080 plus, which is 80 CRV2. Our nickel steels, I wish we saw a lot more of, 8670. And then the one steel that I feel like is slept on absolutely the most is 15N20. The only thing we see 15N20 used for, generally speaking, is either people who make really cheap knives at flea markets who are cutting them out of saw blades or bandsaws, or Svord in New Zealand That's their primary steel, or we see it in Damascus is where we see it the most often because of the nickel content. It's not stainless at all, but it resists acid. So it makes nice contrast with your Damascus. But the steel itself has a potential to equal 8670 in toughness, but at a point or two higher hardness. So where 1095 tops out at a practical range of about 57 on the Rockwell scale for toughness, it tops out at about 10 foot-pounds through Laren Thomas's testing. And 8670 or 15N20 will achieve about 50 foot-pounds up to 61 for 15N20, about 60 for 8670. So you can retain vast amounts of toughness, have higher strength due to your higher hardness, have higher edge stability and thinner edge profiles. It's just very rare to find 15N20 being used as a mono steel at all. And I wish I could see that change. I think that's my number one.
Boy, you guys have really left me in the steel nerd highway dust a long time ago.
Well,
but it's cool. I love hearing it.
Your knowledge eclipses mine probably fairly easily too. But yeah, that's interesting to hear about 15N20 because I have heard really great things. I haven't worked with it myself personally, but have heard some really interesting things. And the other thing too is I think a lot of people don't really use their knives near the limit of near its capability.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a million knives, and I pretty much strop or hone my knife after every single use.
Yep.
So it barely even, doesn't even get dull. I often don't, I very rarely have to re-sharpen, do a real sharpening of my knives because, well, one reason is because I have a lot of them, but the other is I'm constantly, keeping them up to maintenance. So I think you're right that almost, other than the very extremes, most people would not be able to even come close to exhausting the capabilities of any steel. Unless you're doing something, really, really extreme with it. Yeah, and choppers, maybe that's where you get to see maybe the more
toughness, failure. But even with those choppers, I would say that the vast majority of the time where I've seen failure, it's been failure due to design or failure due to heat treatment. Usually it's failure due to design. You've got stress risers that are unnecessary. You've got some line that looks cool. You've got serrations. You've got jimping that might not be done the right way or whatever else. And the failure is not due to the steel or even to the use. It's due to the design of the knife itself. So outside with a well-designed knife, man, even with some weaker steels, they're so hard to break. Even you get a big old knife, it's still the SE Hunglis, a good example. I broke the Hunglis too. Me and Justin Vidito were out there, two veterans who are both well over 200 pounds, and we spent like a whole day trying to break the knife after I had already ripped the edge, so it already has a crack in the edge. We ended up, both of us picked up a rock that was probably 150 pounds up over our heads and had it pounded into a tree and dropped it on the knife because we were tired of trying to break it.
Right.
And it's 3/16 of an inch thick, almost full flat grind, 1095, which I talked about just a little bit ago about having a relatively lower toughness potential as compared to some other steels. And it's still dang near indestructible, so.
Yeah, I have to say, I one of the first knives I sort of got into was the SE knives, and that was, we're getting close to 20 years ago now, 15 years ago anyway. And I still have my 3 that I have beaten on, and the 6 too, that I couldn't be harder on it. Like I want to kill it, and it won't die. And it serves me very well. I mean, those 2 could still be my kind of 2 knives. I mean, they're I have some thoughts on design, but steel wise, very serviceable steel, soft, but easy to sharpen, really quick to a very nice fine edge. Not a real crunchy edge there. So,
hey, we kind of glossed over behind the edge thickness. We haven't talked that much about.
No.
What
I was actually kind of excited to get into that, because for our viewers who might be less nerdy than myself, I brought some examples that I'm completely unaffiliated with.
Oh, I want to see them.
And I had a difficult time picking knives, because I wanted to pick all knives of varying edge thicknesses that I love. So I'm not going to be bashing on anybody, even though I do have a very thick edge here. So to start off, this is a Creeley Mako, and your behind the edge thickness, if I remember right, is about 8 thou. So it almost disappears when you look at it down the edge. It's just paper thin.
Yeah.
I love this knife. However, I would not want this knife to be my primary in some kind of real emergency situation in the woods. I'm not going to be batoning this knife. Mm-hmm. I put this knife along with a bunch of others into a log for pictures, and I stuck the tip into the log and went, and I thought, I'm not going to do that again. Right. So this knife is a joy to use, but a good point on edge thickness. We're at the very much at the thin edge of the spectrum here. The more you get on one side or the other of the spectrum, it doesn't mean it's wrong, but what it means is it's got a more specific intended use.
Exactly.
All right. Let's make sure that we define where behind the edge thickness is made.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
Because I bet there are a lot of people out there who don't know. Yeah.
This isn't the best knife to show this on because it is so thin, but you see at the very tip where the edge is, we've got that reflective edge there.
Yeah.
So if you look at the shoulders of that secondary bevel, or some people call it a micro bevel, it's kind of incorrect, but that's okay. Secondary bevel there, the shoulders, the width at the shoulders of that grind right there. So actually what I want to do is skip ahead a little bit on a knife that'll be easier to show this on. This is the Reef F5, again, a knife that I really like, and it's easier to see. We've got that secondary grind there. And you look down the knife at the edge. If you take your calipers and you measure the shoulders of that grind, that is the behind the edge thickness.
Right where the secondary bevel meets the primary bevel.
Exactly.
The edge bevel meets the main bevel.
And that does get a little bit complicated. And we're gonna have to get to that if we're gonna talk about what sharp means. So that was my very thin, and then you get into some middle grounds, and the chances are, if you've got a knife.
What was that Reef? What was the behind the edge?
That was the F5.
Sorry.
And so this Reef, if memory serves, I believe this Reef is at 35 thou behind the edge.
That makes sense.
And it's a little bit on the beefier side of the middle of the spectrum. So I've got 2 knives here that might have a somewhat potentially similar use. This is a Cypress Creek Knives, a Canadian pattern, and the Reef F5. This is on the thinner edge of being a middle ground edge thickness, right at about 20 thou behind the edge. And this is where I like to have my knives as well. Enough meat to have some toughness, but still be slicey. And then the Reef is intended to be a harder use bushcraft or survival knife on this F5, and we're looking at about 35 thou there. And again, I love both of these knives. So every knife that I brought to demonstrate here, people ask me, Jake, what is the right edge thickness? And there's no single answer for a question that vague, because the behind the edge thickness needs to match the intended task.
Yeah.
So this is a custom bolo that was made for me in Australia by my friend Paul Walker. And our behind the edge thickness here, this is 5160, and we're probably looking at about 50 thou. It's convex, which we can talk about later. But
Well,
as you go up in size, go ahead.
Before you go on, you said it's convex, which
Makes it harder to measure.
Yeah, exactly, because then
Yes.
there's no distinct delineation, and convex
Right.
edge is one of my favorites. I think one of the reasons is you can change that thickness of the edge fairly easily by resharpening it and getting it either thinner
By
or
reshaping the
thicker.
convex.
Yes,
So
exactly.
a lot of times it's harder for me to talk about convex knives because people will be like, oh, that knife would perform better if it was convex. But I see people who convex their own knives who don't really know what they're doing, and they totally destroy the performance of the knife. And so your convex edge could look like this, or those shoulders could be completely blended out, and it could look. So there's a lot of different types. The Japanese actually have some traditional names for different types of convex edges. I don't really know them all. I think one's a clam, one's an apple. That's not my thing. But as you go up in size, the amount of shock and abuse that the knife goes through does not go up in a linear fashion. It goes up exponentially. And now I can easily and comfortably baton through much larger, nastier pieces of wood. I have more leverage in everything that I'm doing. So more meat is justified. And although having more meat behind the edge lowers cutting efficiency, I have more leverage, I have more power, so I don't necessarily for these large tasks need as much cutting efficiency because I have leverage.
Right.
But on the flip side, I said when you get to the extremes, you become a more specialized knife. This knife here would not be winning any onion dicing competitions. And this is not going to be my go-to deer skinner. So I talk about thick edges in a negative light often in many knife reviews because edges are often too thick for their intended use for warranty purposes.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But a thick edge in and of itself is not a bad thing. And I certainly want a thicker edge on my axes than I have on this knife because, again, it's just about the appropriate edge for the use that the knife is going through.
Yeah.
Sure. And again, this is where heat treat can come in because you can have a thinner edge that's harder. And of course, you have to worry about chipping at some point. But there are a lot of steels that you can push. You can push, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 HRC from what is kind of, generally accepted.
Right.
And get a laser edge that hangs tough pretty well unless you're doing really extreme stuff. I mean, regular woods bushcraft, you can get an amazingly thin edge if it's hard enough or, just right. To work all day and maybe need a strop or two and that's it. And it will still shave after the end of the day. So again, that heat treat is so crucial. I mean, everything's crucial, right? It's like there's not one aspect of steel that is more important than the other. They all interact with one another to make the whole. And any change in one will change a number of other factors in that steel.
So and one of the reasons that some understanding of behind the edge thickness is so important, not only for the consumer, but the maker, is one aspect of a knife's ability to resist abuse that is not a metric that is not measured as often as strength. So strength is different than toughness. Toughness is your ability to resist cracking, and strength is your ability to resist deformation or
Right.
bending. So a microchip is a crack, micro bevels, macro chips, they're a crack. And so you want to go up in hardness until you start getting microchipping and then maybe back it off half a point or whatever the case
Right.
may be. Another thing that's important to mention is that the Rockwell scale is not linear. So as you go up in the numbers, it curves and you're going higher and higher. The difference of 60 to 62 is vastly different in hardness than the difference of 58 to 60.
Right.
But what's important about the edge geometry is you, as a maker or production company, can fix all of your problems with one thing, and that's edge thickness. So your knife is not tough enough, it's too hard, thicker edge.
Mm-hmm.
Your knife doesn't have enough strength. I'm sorry, too hard. I got those backwards. Whether it's too soft or too hard, you can fix problems with bending or cracking by having a thicker edge. If you're not sure about your heat treat, thicken the edge. If you're not sure about your design and you have stress risers, thicken your edge. So what we've traditionally seen is a lot of production knives and knife makers, especially if there's any kind of real use going on outside of skinning, we just, for a while especially, just saw thicker and thicker and thicker edges. And I was thinking about bringing a knife out that I carried on deployment that I absolutely despised, and it's like 70 thou behind the edge and still took damage from doing basically nothing. That company is trying to fix their problems with behind the edge thickness.
Mm-hmm.
And it's lazy and can be disingenuous.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and it's solving a problem that might solve you right out of your intended use of the knife.
Right.
Because the thicker the edge you get, that will push the use
right
to a different side of the spectrum. Like if you don't want a carving knife that's thick, right? You want something thin.
Right.
So I remember seeing that, this boy, it was years and years ago, but everybody started going like just stupid thick. Like these knives were basically just pry bars. And then it went to kind of thinner steel and then a little bit more refined edges. But we the knife making community has not caught up on the edge geometry. We've kind of caught up on like, yes, you do not need 1/4 inch thick steel to do daily tasks. I mean, your daily tasks are not, killing orcs. It is opening boxes and a few other things that you might do. So we've sort of gotten back down to thinner steels, and I think our edges are being a little bit more sophisticated and refined, but not enough.
Yeah. And I think the bushcraft community has advanced quite a bit. I think there's a lot of people in the tactical community, which you guys are now in, that have not made that progression yet. I think the difficulty with that is they can get away with that because the average tactical buyer is not a user.
Right.
Yeah.
So I see, and I'm just talking generally speaking, walking around blade shows, even with custom makers, even with high prices, some crazy thick edges. And the other thing that having a thick edge does for makers is it also means less time grinding, less chance of overheating your steel and ruining the edge, and more chances to fix mistakes. So because edge thickness can solve all problems, regardless of what problem it is, except for making the knife practical and enjoyable to use. That's what we see from a lot of new makers, from a lot of old makers, from a lot of older manufacturers, from a lot of different stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why for a few years now, I've kind of been on a edge thickness rampage. uh, in the industry.
Good for you. We need it.
Yeah, we do need it.
We need more education about. I mean, knives are so primal that we think we understand. You see a knife and you say, "Oh, I get it. It's a knife. But edge thickness, edge grind, heat treat, type of steel, intended use, et cetera, et cetera. So many factors to consider." So,
well, and when we talk about what does sharp mean, Chas, I think you mentioned kind of getting a false feeling of sharpness. I think you were, might be paraphrasing, talking maybe about the toothiness of an edge, maybe using a coarse sharpening method that almost might give you a micro saw blade effect that feels super sharp.
Yeah.
But then you lose it really quickly because those little micro saw blades don't have support. Over. So
yeah, they just fold over.
Every culinary knife commercial that you've ever seen that cuts that tomato paper thin has got that toothy edge. I mean, I can get that toothy edge, and I can make you think that, by cutting tomatoes, that this is the sharpest knife in the world.
Right.
And then you go to cut anything else, and immediately you can almost feel the little sticks molecules on the edge there. So that's a dirty little trick that a lot of low end production guys, production companies use, is that toothy edge.
Yeah.
Which sometimes you want.
Yeah.
There are times, like I have kind of rope specific knives that I like a rough edge on.
Yeah.
Because it cuts the fibers of the rope really quickly and easily, and that's what it's for. But that is what that knife is for.
Like all things, we have also, a variety of things that this could mean. So you could have an edge that you put on with a 36 grit, right? Or you could have just a slightly toothy edge. But I think that this directly goes along with what people think sharp is. When I purchased this knife that I was so unhappy with in 2009, you could buy it outright, or you could pay $20 extra and get it sharp. But it wouldn't be as tough because it's sharp, because people equated sharpness to thinness.
Right.
Yeah.
And like we talked about earlier, they're completely separate for that initial sharpness. It's about your apex alignment. And so when your knife is sharp, you've got some of this going on at the tip instead of a perfectly aligned edge. And so if you've got a really toothy edge where you've got a bunch of saw teeth here, those saw teeth don't have as much support behind them. Right. So it's easier for them to come over. Whereas if it's perfectly straight and smooth and perfectly aligned, it's going to be quite a bit tougher of an edge.
Yeah.
So, and then the shape of the secondary, we talked a little bit about convexing secondary bevels earlier. And again, this is a harder one for me to get into because there's so many variables, and it really becomes a game of not just saying your edge is convexed, but how it's convexed. But you could have a perfectly theoretically, you could have a perfectly flat secondary bevel. I think generally speaking, to some degree, it will always be a little bit convexed, or it could even be hollow, depending on if you're sharpening it slightly on like a Tormek or something. But you could have you could have it, let's say, a little bit hollow. You could have it perfectly flat. You could have it convexed, and then you also have a difference in micro bevel height. So if this knife is 35 thou behind the edge right here, but that edge is brought all the way up to the middle here, and it's still 35 thou right there, you're not going to have a lot of support behind that edge. It's going to be an incredibly slicey but incredibly delicate edge. You might measure at that shoulder at 35 thou, but if you were to measure it at 15 or 20 thou from the edge here, you'd be looking at like a 10 thou edge or less. So we have it gets a little more complicated than just behind the edge thickness, because behind the edge we have the variable not only of the secondary bevel height, but also the secondary bevel shape. So I've been harping on behind the edge thickness a lot.
Jacob, when you say shape, what do you mean by shape?
Well, so what I mean by shape of your secondary bevel would be whether that secondary bevel is hollow,
okay, gotcha,
flat, or convex.
Right.
Yeah.
And we have to make a distinction between a convex edge and a convex grind, because a convex grind would be one continuous curve from the spine to the edge, which is really the purest kind of convex, thing.
And then, zero ground convex.
Right. And for me, a lot of my V-edge knives, I'll just take it to the, and convex the edge.
Right.
And form that edge the way I want it, depending on, like you said, kind of almond, the fine end of an almond kind of shape, which is sort of what I consider kind of fine, and then a little bit more chopper, a little bit more just a real, kind
abrupt,
of obtuse meeting there. But so a true convex grind is what I guess you'd kind of consider it like a 0 degree edge. Like there is no secondary bevel there. There is just one continuous line, and very few knives out there are true convex grinds. But the convex edges are mainly what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So I think your Bark Rivers are convex grinds. And there's just so much that can go into that. And then also, if you have a 0 ground knife that's a Scandi that's flat, it's so vastly different than a full 0 ground convex. And if you have the Scandi grind is overall speaking the weakest grind, because it is a 0 grind.
Yep.
But if you take that Scandi and just lightly convex the edge, you can make massive gains in toughness with fairly minimal loss of initial cutting ability. So it actually gets a little bit into the weeds. It's not easy to market. So if you want to sell knives and you want to educate your customers in the process, you're spending extra money to do that, because it's more difficult and it takes more time, which is, I think, why we don't see it done for the average knife. I think it's the right way to go, though. I think we should be, instead of bringing our product down to our customers, I think we should spend the effort to try and bring our customers up to a level of understanding to know what is actually good about what we're selling them.
We at Fisher Blades heartily agree. I mean, we actually came out with a user manual for our Beckwith Covert,
which was fantastic, by the way.
And why doesn't everyone do it? I mean, there are tips and tricks that could have been communicated to me way early in my knife journey. I would have been so far ahead. I wouldn't have had to buy like 100 knives to learn the lessons. I would have understood a little bit better. And even the guys of us that are experienced, sometimes it's good to just get back to basics and go, oh yeah, that's right. These are the basic kind of things about the knife and how to use it to get back on track. So we're at Fisher Blades, we're trying to educate as much as we can and just open it up to feedback too. We ask our customers frequently for feedback, because we know we don't know everything. We're trying to educate from what we know, but there's a lot of knowledge out there, and I wish more people would spend the time and money on education, because I think ultimately it's a good business decision. People will come back to you if they feel comfortable coming to you with questions, even dumb questions, or simple questions. And there's some loyalty attached to people who are willing to go the extra expense and time of educating. So we're with you on that.
That's why we're sitting with you.
Yeah, that's why we're doing this, is to educate ourselves and others.
Yeah.
So, and actually, with your Beckwith, I was actually when I read your manual and realized how I could draw a little bit differently, it completely changed my draw for me. And your manual is excellent, and that was one of the biggest things that I saw that I appreciated is like, let's get a knife with every manual. And I have said in the past, there are certain knife designs out there that are incredibly popular that I don't like as much. And people say, oh, well, if you just put in the man hours to learn how to do X, Y, and Z with this knife, you'll see the value and the potential there. And generally speaking, I think a design should tell you how the knife should be used. That's what a good design is. So if you need a manual to even be able to use it, that's usually a negative. However, including that manual for little tips and little things that some people might not know, and you don't know the experience level of your customers. So your Beckwith, I was drawing it before, but I drew it more positively, more quickly, better with your manual. And it's designed very specific on the draw. And I didn't need the manual to understand what you were trying to do with the knife. Right. So I feel like if you need a manual to understand the knife, then it's a bad design. And yet, let's start including these manuals. Let's start bringing these customers up, not with marketing, but with actual information and understanding.
Yeah, well, that was the idea behind that manual is to, and you're right, there are so many people out there that carry knives like that have absolutely, they don't really even know why they're carrying them. They just think it looks cool. And
the status symbol.
Yeah, and just to be able to pull it out at parties and show the other dudes at the party. But I think it really is quite important to tell people really how to, what it's really for. It's going to bring everybody up.
Yeah, absolutely. And you guys did a fantastic job with that. A difficult, I think as you learn more about anything, you learn more nuance. You learn more where things might not be black and white. There's a lot of different things here. And one place where I've caught a lot of flack that we could talk about is fashion steels, because I do not see the necessity for them to exist. However, I do appreciate them.
Mm-hmm.
And so somehow when I talk about these steels, my listeners will come off believing that either A, I hate super steels and I'm just a high carbon junkie, or B, I'm a high carbon junkie that hates super steels, which actually I got accused of that quite a bit. And I was like, my entire product line is super steels, guys. Like I don't hate super steels, guys. I don't understand where you're getting
what steel do you have your knives in?
It's not the most modern super steel right now. My primary steel is S35 VN.
Yep.
And I'm very happy with it.
Yeah, it's a pretty solid steel.
I'm very happy with what we're able to accomplish on it with my designs and with the heat treat and stuff like that. I just did also release knives in A2 tool steel, which again, I've just absolutely loved using that as well. So I am hearing this raging torrent across the internet of, if you're going to put the time and effort into making a knife, there's no purpose on using crusty steels.
Mm-hmm.
And then this opposite raging torrent of people saying, I only use these crusty steels and anything else is unnecessary.
By crusty, you mean sort of outdated and old fashioned?
There's a couple of meanings that I feel like people usually use. Some people just use outdated or old, but a lot of times when you hear people talk about crusty steel, they're talking about high carbon steels and steels that corrode.
Yeah. Okay.
So it can go either way there. And on paper, if you're not actually out using knives, I could see why you would argue that there is no place for high carbon steels anymore. There's no reason. You look at Laren Thomas charts and you look at the toughness and corrosion resistance, and then you look at the cost, and why would anybody even buy this, like 01 or 1095 or whatever else? However, I do believe out in the field, especially in the woods, there is a fantastic place for them. I believe they are still relevant. But when it comes to the fashion steels, where do you guys stand on that?
Well, we have some, probably some mixed views on it. I mean, I think there's no question when you look at the performance charts and you look at something like MagnaCut, it scores pretty high,
Right.
and it's balance, right, between, between different attributes. But
those numbers are like the performance numbers of a car, right? Like 0 to 60 in 2.2 seconds. And you're lucky if you get to do that once with that
exactly.
car.
Right.
And then it's like, okay, I've done it. It can do it. It's great. It's a fast car. I have a fast car. So for me as a maker, I always felt like I started, late in life in my 40s making knives. So it wasn't like a young kid learning steels. And I always thought it was my responsibility to really explore and test and, master to the best of my ability a steel before I moved on to another. Because as a knife maker, you have to understand steels, and you don't understand steels in a week. It takes months and years to do it. And so I was very comfortable using, A2, which is, the makers that taught me used it a lot. So I use it a lot and I explored it. I started changing the recipe that I learned and messing with it, and got to a point where I felt like, I might be hitting about 85-90% of the potential of that steel. And then I would sort of try to move on to another steel, and not a high end steel, but just, regular steels, A2, 8670, which is one of my favorite steels of all time. I
love 8670 so much.
It's just amazing steel. It is so easy.
I'm not opposed to, using something like MagnaCut in some of our knives, as long as it still fulfills the requirements of the knife and what its function is supposed to be for. Now, if it is too much for it, and that's what people want, we'll consider putting that steel in, but or using that steel for a batch of those knives. But it doesn't have to be. We chose AEBL, for example, with the Beckwith Covert for a reason, and it matched very well the performance needs of that knife. And if there is a hue and a cry from the market that they want that in MagnaCut, well, we'll do an edition in MagnaCut. Of course, it's going to cost more because it's about 4 or 5 times more expensive as a steel, right?
Right.
But you don't have to have it in MagnaCut. It is not going to make it perform better, even for the most advanced, combative knife, bladed combative person.
Right.
It's just not going to make any difference.
So with that being said, and knife news wise, with the potential of Crucible closing here pretty soon, and the knife steel market becoming a little bit more difficult. We've been so spoiled for the past 10-15 years, honestly. But with all of this going on, both of you guys, if you had to choose 2 steels, not just for the knives that you make, but for all knives, period, every single knife out there, you could only choose one of 2 steels, what would your 2 steel choices be?
That's an impossible question,
dude.
I mean, right now, as you're talking to me, this is what I'm going to say. I'm going to say 8670 because I know it. I mean, I feel like I know that steel so well. I know I can cook it a certain way. I can, I feel like I've worked with it so much that I know it, and I love the performance. The downfall of it is that it does rust incredibly easily, stains incredibly easily. But for a knife guy who's always taking care of his knives, it's a non-issue. And I also like patina, so
Yep.
I let it get black, get that oxidized layer, and just kind of let it go.
And you mean two steels that are not crucible steels, since that might not be an option.
Well, and with that being said, actually, not necessarily, because if you were to pick a crucible steel, we generally have alternatives. So, for instance, to get into the nerdiness, this is the only knife that I own or have ever seen in Bowler N360. Bowler N360 is Bowler's version of LC200 or LC200N, which is the same as Zap's Zfinite. It's got high toughness, pretty good edge holding, and it is, for all intents and purposes, absolutely rust proof. So Spyderco uses it in their Salt series.
Yep.
So, if you were to pick a crucible steel, people would understand what you mean, and there would be alternatives. So I wouldn't necessarily say without mentioning any CPM steel, if you want.
Yeah.
Just whatever.
So we got 8670.
I love 8670. I have to say I love 5160 and 52100.
You've exceeded your two.
I also love 3V. I can get an edge on 3V almost as good as I can with 01. It's such a fine edge. I mean, I can get it. I feel like it's almost at the molecular, like one molecule at the edge, like that fine of an edge. It's impossible. I mean, I love kind of the old steels. I do, because I guess partly because I'm just some dude in a shop making knives. I don't have computerized equipment and all this stuff. And so I like kind of the older steels, but
what would your two steels be?
Yeah,
what would yours be?
So I would pick a corrosion resistant steel and a not corrosion resistant steel. And so I think there's a good chance that the market could even benefit from this situation. If we didn't have so many steel choices, then maybe people would start focusing on edge geometry and what actually makes a good knife. But for I'm a stainless, a corrosion resistant steel, I could go with 14C28N, AEBL, Nitro V, or LC200N. These steels, they hold an edge well.
Nitro V is a great one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're in fact, if you could only have one steel as a whole, I think ABL would be fantastic, because this big old chopper right here with the right edge geometry, probably honestly with the same edge geometry, could probably be ABL and be more than tough enough to do what's needed. It's got such a high toughness threshold. So it could be, like I said, it could be 14C28N, 13C28, which is AEBL, LC200N, or Nitro V as one of my picks. And any of those, I don't think anybody would notice a difference very much.
No.
And then on my crusty side here, 8670 or 15N20. I don't have as much experience. I'm actually testing 8670, 15N20, and Z Tough from Zap side by side right now on the exact same knife, or preparing to, so I can have a better idea of that. So your Vasco die series of steels, CD1, 1V, and Z Tough. How would
ADCRV2 fare with you?
Yeah, so I want to test those, but I can't say I'd pick them yet. But 8670, 15N20, 52100, ADCRV2, though, any one of those.
Yeah.
And I would just be overjoyed. And I think basically what you would have is every knife might as well be stainless and AEBL or whatever else we pick. And I think you could be happy with the right hardness and the right design, I think you could be happy with a chef knife in ABL, and I think you could be happy in a chopper. I mean, it's just a amazingly well balanced steel.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, if you do need more toughness, then that's where you could go to the 8670 or the 15 and 20, 52 100. I'd probably go with those three over 80 CRV2 by a hair. Not that it matters. We're talking potential performance here. They have a little bit more toughness, but a little less edge holding. But so with that being said, my S35VN is smack dab in the middle.
Yeah.
On everything.
Yeah.
And MagnaCut is coming down in price at the moment because it's become so popular with big production companies. And if that was as affordable as anything else, yeah, it'd be amazing. But I don't think it's necessary. I think that the bougie steels are good for the market. They're good for the industry because they keep people buying. And what I need and what you guys need and custom makers need, knife companies need, they need people to keep buying. There's something that the marketing is important. I want it to be honest marketing, but it does give us something to get people excited about. And that is not a bad thing in and of itself.
No.
But
it needs to be acknowledged that it's not conveying any magical powers to that knife,
right?
That it might not have in a more mundane steel.
Yeah. And if we go into extremes, like I need a knife to do everything in a saltwater environment. I'm on a boat all the time, boat/island. I'm gonna bushcraft and cut fish.
Yeah.
Well, at that point, ABL would be an inferior choice to LC200N. Or even MagnaCut, because they are so corrosion resistant, but they still have a whole lot of toughness.
Right.
And those are extreme uses. And I'm glad that we have the selection and variety that we have. I'm glad that we have the bougie steels. I said, I'm testing the bougie steels, and I want to offer the absolute best potential performance steel I possibly can on knives that I can afford to sell that way. Right. But I can't always afford to sell knives that way. There's less buyers as you creep up in price.
Yep.
And so those simple old crusty steels, like I said, a few stainless options and a few non-stainless options. I think the entire industry could be good to go and may even be better for it because more people might start focusing on the things that matter instead of roping people who don't know any better in for sales purely based on steel selection. And the other thing to mention real quick, I wanted to mention is we see people selling these new bougie steels that get really popular, but we see quality control issues regularly for the first year or so. Because your steel doesn't matter if your heat treat is wrong.
Right? Oh, man.
So these simple steels with easy heat treat.
Well, not just heat treat, but everything, right? Like we got a competitor's knife recently. Super popular right now. Things sell out in moments. And we were shocked at what we found in the edge. I mean, such a poor edge on this knife.
I mean, like everything is secondary to the edge. Everything else about a knife is there to support the edge.
Yeah. That exactly.
Is the edge is the 0 point. That is where you start a knife.
Yeah.
And to have completely the grind wasn't symmetrical, toothy. I mean, crap, man. Embarrassing.
Yeah.
Embarrassing.
We would have been embarrassed
me,
to produce that.
I know who you're talking about. I would say we don't have to say it, but I would say 99% sure I know who you're talking about.
Well, we're not
going to say it because we're not into that, but we can do it offline.
Now, on the same vein, another knife company production, kind of our size, kind of very similar to us in size, I think. A beautiful edge, and you could tell that they took
superb
hand time on it, like we do on ours. I sharpen every single knife. I hand hone and strop it and test it. I might as well have alopecia at this point because there's like hardly any body hair left on me.
Yep.
I have to do like the gear for a while and just go. Can't do that for a couple of weeks. Move over here.
Yeah.
But
he doesn't have to use Nair anymore.
But there are other companies out there that are doing it like us. And I mean, beautiful edge, but shocking to see a multi-$100 knife with an edge that it's an embarrassment.
So consider this real quick. Let's say your knife doesn't matter. There's a buyer for any knife at any price. If you have it, let's just say a $200 knife, but you can pay $300 to market that $200 knife and sell it for $400 more. You just made $100 of extra profit. And at the end of the day, it didn't cost you anything because you just slapped the price tag on that. So what we do see, and this is a very complicated subject when it comes to marketing and honest and good marketing. Marketing is not bad in and of itself, but what we do see is a lot of companies get to where they're at not because of their product, but because of their marketing.
Of course.
And that is really a bummer, but that's also something that I need to think about for myself. I don't like paying for marketing. And that puts me behind. That makes me my own worst enemy. But the world that we live in, people using your knives and telling their friends, dude, this is the best knife I've ever used. You need to get one of these. Won't happen, is less likely to happen when the average user isn't using the knives.
Sure.
And so word of mouth doesn't mean what it used to mean. It's still there, don't get me wrong. But if you had no marketing whatsoever, the rate at which you could potentially grow your customer base just by people using and being impressed by your value and quality is not what it would have been 20 years ago.
Oh, not at all.
So it comes down to people who have figured that out and who are going to bend you over a barrel to allow you to be successful. You will not be successful unless you pay me. That's what they all want you to think. Yeah. And so that's what's really hard. And with what you guys are talking about there, with the one you're disappointed in, that's very common. I have seen that very regularly. And it just comes down to they figured out how to sell. They don't even need to be knife people. They can be a doggone suit.
Yeah.
They can know more about soy lattes than knives.
But I also believe that they eventually it'll come around and bite them in the ass. Because eventually people are going to get wise to the fact that they've got crappy edges, that their design is just sort of cookie cutter stuff. They're using basically the same profile for everything. Or whatever the sort of quality or design complaint you could level at them. And eventually people are not, they might be uninformed, but they're not stupid. And eventually people will figure that out and they will ditch them. And so I think that there is for sure there's long-term value at probably a short-term cost of having the integrity of being honest with how you talk about your stuff. And I don't even like using the term marketing anymore because I think that it's become so associated with dishonesty that I'd rather just say, communicating about my product or whatever term you want to put on it. That's how I view it. At Fisher Blades is I don't market. I talk about our knives. Now try to talk to the right people about them and teach them about them. And it is a slower walk. It's a walk, not a run to growth and to some degree of financial success.
Well, what's really sad about that is for every one maker that we've all heard of, there's 100, 200, 500, 1,000 makers that are so incredibly talented, but they're not going to pick up a camera. They're not going to take good pictures. They're not going to do videos. That's not what they're good at. They're good at making knives. Yeah. And they will sell knives that are twice as good as their competitors at a third or a quarter of the cost, and they will remain oftentimes at a hobby level because they can't go full time because that's just not their strength.
Yeah.
And I think as a knife nerd, that might actually be, as a consumer, that might actually be the best part of the market
Mm-hmm.
is finding these guys who just suck at the marketing,
Yeah.
but they're making and selling these knives and they're vastly undervalued for what they should be. And you can discover this absolute gem of a maker, but you had to put in the time and actively search for them.
Yeah.
Well,
you do a good
hard,
job
man.
of that. You know, I've seen you going around at shows looking for them, and
yeah, he found me that one year.
him, yeah.
So
speaking of marketing and dishonesty in marketing, that's a pretty good pivot to some of the things that you talk about that are not knife related.
Oh yeah, you're right. In fact, one thing that I've been talking to you about a little bit that's awfully scary right now, like real life. I wanted to mention a dead internet theory to you guys.
Yeah, we'd spoken briefly about it. I find that just an amazing concept, right? That it could, and you outline it. You tell us. What it
lay
is.
It out.
So to give a general idea of what we mean, the concept here is that there will become a point on the internet where so much of the internet is fake, it's AI, it's bots, etc., that your actual user on the internet, the guy actually looking for information or trying to share information, is only a very small percentage of what's on the internet. And to give an example of this, Larrin Thomas just recently found, I talk about Larrin Thomas, guys, a lot. Guys, knife steel nerds, if people want to learn, I just can't recommend him enough, in my opinion. He doesn't replace practical use and application. Reading his stuff, it helps to have the wisdom to go with it and the experience to go with it. But that is a solid, in my opinion, of the most solid resource. But anyways, he found his articles that were ripped off by AI on other websites. They take his name out of it and they change quite a few things in there. They missed the point on quite a few of the points that he made because they're changing things randomly because it's AI. But these articles are out there, and they're
really,
yeah. And so he, even to make fun of that, just recently did a post. Can AI design the perfect knife steel? And went to Chat GPT or whatever and had it try and figure out what the knife composition that he should be looking for would be. But it's
I think we're getting there, because I have to tell you, I mean, searching online for something specific, a technical aspect of something, all I get now are basically ads to buy shit.
Yeah.
Well, very even on places like YouTube, which were, I mean, I learned how to work on engines by just getting on YouTube and going, okay, I'm going to learn this.
Right.
Now, I mean, now it's all this kind of, it's not AI per se, but it is like very shallow channels doing this, hey, look at me video to get views with very little
it's making money, and it's an algorithm showing you not what they think you want to see, but what they want you to see that can make them money based on what you want to see.
And but I do think the scarier part of it really has to do with the AI generated content that is
it's terrifying.
Erroneous. And it's shallow. It's sometimes flat out wrong. And there are people consuming that thinking that real humans write it, real experts write it. And we should probably be thinking about getting to the point where, and I think we probably are, I think a good portion of our population is so distrusting of what they read and see and hear. I think they maybe are in a state of shock and they don't know how to get real information. Some of them, I find myself like that sometimes, like, holy shit, what do I believe? I mean, unless I see the person in person saying something, I might not be able to believe it. especially deep fakes are going to get to the point where video of a person saying something could be completely made up, right?
If the last several years of the sickness have shown us that it doesn't have to be AI. I mean, people are full of shit and are lying to us for really terrible reasons. And maybe we're getting to the point where people are finally going, I can't trust anything. So I don't know, maybe it'll be a backlash. What do you think? I mean, do you think this is a hole that we can't get out of, or is it a point at which the people recognize it and prevent it from going further?
So there are a number, I would say there's a large number of people that do not have the capacity to spot the fake stuff. And we will see that a lot on our social medias with AI generated images that people don't know are AI. My dad, our older generation here, sent me a couple of videos and he's like, dude, is this real? And to me, I'm like, obviously not, Dad. Come on here. But for me, it's funny. And it's like, obviously it's not. He didn't know.
Like the whole infamous, I can't remember Google. Was it Google AI that when you asked for images of Nazis, it showed like African-American, black Nazis and, and Native American Nazis. It's like, no, I don't think so. I don't think that's what they look like.
So what I see here is the ultimate money for us peasants. Money is a way to measure and put a value on our time and essentially on our lives. However, when you get to a certain point, money becomes a measurement of power and your ability to use other people and other people's lives. And the ultimate power is information. And so I think the internet was a hugely dangerous place for the people in power for decentralized information. So I can go on YouTube and I can teach people or tell people whatever I want, not because it's going to make me money, but because I'm passionate about it. That's dangerous if I'm going to share that for free. If I'm sharing good information.
You can't do that on YouTube anymore.
It's getting harder.
You can talk about some things, but there's other things that you just
I've got to play it safe. Well, and YouTube is actually far better than our other social medias, which is terrifying.
It's true.
But decentralized, we were talking about marketing. Well, 10 years ago, people exploded using their own forums and their own social medias and just showing off their stuff.
Yeah.
That is lost money for someone else who could have forced them to pay to grow.
It lost money for all of Madison Avenue, ad agencies, and all the sort of big conglomerated segments of our economy.
So to tie this into our industry, historically, interestingly enough, when you go back and you look at knowledge in metallurgy, we had great renaissances, especially when Vikings were out there wanting to chop people up into pieces on understanding of knife steels and how to smelt it and how to heat treat it. And then in times of peace, this information disappears. We actually have quality of tools going up and going down, not just constantly going up, because a lot of this information was kept as a secret. It is power. And we are going to continue to see that, but it's a lot more difficult with the internet. The internet coming out and giving people power and giving you the ability to find information on your own. Information was decentralized. That was incredibly dangerous. I think dead internet theory is a theory that explains the reality of how the powers that be are figuring out a way to take that away from us, to make that null and void, to make people have to go back to either being ignorant or pay to learn.
And so would that theory or the people who talk about that theory believe, or you think that that's like a conscious express move by those in power to take it back, or is it just some sort of organic
I would say
outcome?
there's always a balance. So it is a fact, an absolute proven and admitted fact that when Elon Musk bought Twitter, there was a cell of the FBI working at Twitter, and they were purposefully manipulating Twitter to manipulate what people saw and why.
Were they doing that with bots?
Yes.
Okay.
Among other things. So not only do we have bots, we've got troll accounts. You can go buy a troll account, by the way. And I've experienced this quite a bit when I tell the truth about some people connected to the CIA who don't like the truth being told about them, but or companies. You can go online, you can go pay a troll company. Some are based in the US, some are based overseas, and they will send hundreds, if not thousands of people to comment negativity on all of your stuff. So that's part of this is organic. Part of I would say part of everything is always organic. There's always an organic side to things, but there's also always someone who sees a power vacuum and is going to actively look to fill that power vacuum. So like with the FBI, with Mark Zuckerberg admitting that Meta, that Facebook was altering who would see what and censoring the truth and crushing it. It is at least partially purposeful. In fact, when the stuff happened with Kyle.
So wait, real quickly. So those examples you just mentioned, the Twitter stuff and all the shenanigans going on with FBI there, and Facebook and their manipulation of information that went out, that would dovetail into dead internet theory for you. Is that correct? Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. So these people have a financial or power incentive to create a huge facade of the internet of free speech, decentralized information, when the reality of what you're seeing is bots, fake information, paid information, and junk. Why is my Instagram request box filled with this smut spam?
But not junk for no reason. It's junk for manipulation purposes for somebody, either with a commercial interest or a political interest or some sort of other ideological interest. That's what's, I think, probably happening. And you got the FBI's interest, which was,
so at the end of the day,
ideological.
I worked with psyops a little bit, and a government psyop is marketing for an idea. So we talk about marketing. You understand marketing a product. Psyops is marketing an idea. And so when anything that a business has a vested interest in investing in, chances are a government does as well. Ideas are money. Ideas are power.
Give us an example.
So, an example of a psyop. So, I was in Afghanistan, and we were handing out radios that have a hand crank on them and a solar panel on them, so that anybody can listen to the radio. Okay.
Yeah.
These radios we knew were being used to blow us up. So they could use the batteries out of these things to ignite their bombs. They could use the cranks. They could use the solar panels. It was well known that these were being used to ignite the IEDs that were blowing us up and killing us. And nobody understood why are we going out here and dying to give out these for free? And that costs money from the taxpayers, by the way. So we're spending money creating a product to give out for free, and that product is being used to kill us. Yeah. Doesn't make a lot of sense, right?
Yeah.
We were also going on missions to help certain individuals. I kid you not, we drove like days in a convoy to go and try and help a woman whose uterus had fallen out. So her uterus was on the outside of her body. They denied us. We drove all the way home. Could have all died, could have cost the taxpayers millions of dollars to help this woman.
Who denied you?
The lady's husband.
Okay. So
the community. Yeah. So they were like, no, you're not taking her anywhere.
Yeah.
Okay. But the reason that we were doing all this was not because we wanted to help people. The radios were playing our radio station, which played the most popular music for the area.
Mm-hmm.
But we did talk shows and commercials and stuff like that in between where we really talked a lot about women's rights. Because we could not get the Afghanis to work with us, and we could not manipulate anybody in their family to backstab the rest of their family or anybody else in their family. So we're investing billions of dollars to share this message about women's rights and to go find women who need help and to help them so that we could advertise it and tell everybody how good we are so that we could manipulate the people.
Yeah.
And so I'm not.
How cynical does that experience make you? Probably pretty cynical, huh?
Yeah, and YouTube was the best return on investment on the planet. So if I want to do a TV commercial about my knife, I'm going to invest probably tens of thousands of dollars into getting the commercial professionally made.
Mm-hmm.
And then how much am I going to have to spend for this to be on Fox News? Like, I couldn't even tell you. I would guess hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
I would guess there'd be a yearly, monthly contract, something like that. I have no idea. I'm like way too low to even guesstimate. Okay.
Yeah.
But if I send this knife to somebody on YouTube, let's not even talk about whether he does honest reviews or not. I'm just going to send this knife to somebody who's successful on YouTube. And let's say I send him $1,000. I might sell 100 knives. In fact, when the Dutch bushcraft guys reviewed the Survive Knives knife, some people attribute that to part of the downfall of Survive Knives. The amount of orders that they got was so huge that, and their profit margins weren't large enough, so they had decarb and some other little issues they couldn't recover.
Right.
So the potential return on investment is unlike anything we'd ever seen before. Mm. But what that also means is the return on investment for marketing an idea could be much the same. So now we can have podcasts, talk show hosts, we can create heroes for the average American people to look up to. And if we can create these people as heroes for them, then we can subtly make them believe or tweak their beliefs on certain issues. And again, our return on investment is going to be exponentially higher than anywhere else.
Yeah, I think I know. I mean, you're not naming some of these people, but I think I know who you're talking about. You can name them if you want. I don't particularly care, but if you want to keep it on the down low, that's fine. What ideas could they want to be selling us behind, under the banner of these new heroes?
So the low hanging fruit here is Tim Kennedy.
Yeah.
And that's easy, and it's current. So he's getting absolutely trashed everywhere right now. It's all out in the open. Yeah, of course, I covered it years ahead of time in multiple videos, and it didn't pick up because I'm not going to get views because that's to some degree controlled. Mm-hmm. But Tim Kennedy did his podcast with Lance Armstrong. So you have an American war hero who's constantly shooting guns, who's now sponsored by SIG to be the face of Sig Sauer, who has government contracts. And Sean Ryan's always given away what? Sig Sauer firearms. But anyways, so you have this guy who's an American war hero. He just released his book about being an American war hero, and he represents patriotism and liberty and freedom. But he's going to go on a podcast and explain to you how gun ownership is not a human right with Lance Armstrong. And he's doubled down on this a few times. And he doesn't generally say it outright. In fact, in that podcast, what's difficult for me is people always talk about how he said that I don't think an 18-year-old should be able to own a gun because I know how I was when I was 18. And so that's what normally gets shared through the anti-Tim Kennedy Second Amendment podcast and stuff. But later in the podcast, people have such a short attention span. 40 minutes in, he's talking about how I don't like that raw milk is illegal because I don't want anybody to tell me what to do. But you owning a gun is affecting and endangering other people. It's not. And he said, gun ownership is not a right. You do not have a right to just go down and buy a gun no matter who you are. People never share that clip because it's too deep in there.
So so I'm gathering you think that there's that it's a psyop, right? That it's not just Tim Kennedy being maybe inconsistent with his views the way, you or I might be more consistent. The three of us would probably land, would probably have pretty consistent views on stuff like raw milk and the Second Amendment. But is it possible that he is just simply inconsistent with it, or has his own different views?
He's doubled down on it, and the issue is that there's been quite a few things here that I think are very much on purpose. A lot of the things that he says, I think, are because he's an idiot. But one of the things that you will notice being on YouTube, being on social media, being at Blade Show, going through the grind, or whether you're business or social media, one of the things that you will see is you'll see the grind, you'll see the work. Okay. So when you see these people who are a household name overnight, but who literally did nothing, they don't post engaging content on social media. They don't use the hashtags. They don't go do YouTube videos, but they get on mainstream media, and overnight they are a household name. When you've got a knife company that's never been to Blade Show, that comes up overnight, that's in that's out there doing competitions with politicians, that every guy with military service, these military heroes that we've been given, they all pull out his knives. Every single massive podcast from Sean Ryan.
I'm 99% sure I know which brand you're talking about, but I'm not going to mention.
Right. when this person in particular posts the year that he was living in a single wide trailer as a lineman, but 4 years later, he has a multi-million-dollar estate in Montana, and he's going to hire more employees than Benchmade, a company that has existed for, I actually don't know how long, maybe since the 80s, I'm assuming, for 40 years, is a mainstream name for decades, and you're going to be bigger than them in a matter of like 4 years, but you never put in where. So now let's look at what we're missing and how is that possible? How do I get multiple episodes on Fox News as a lineman living in a single wide? Why is somebody in Saudi Arabia calling me for a custom knife that wants to pay me tens of thousands of dollars and is going to fly me to Saudi Arabia when my knives look like crap? So there,
I just have a hard time understanding who's behind it and why. I mean, you have maybe a better insight into it. That's why I'm asking, right?
well,
Why?
yeah, um, these people feed into each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, oh, that's clear, right? You can see it.
Yeah.
They're all part of a pretty cohesive network of same types, right?
And so they don't have to all promote an agenda. They don't all have to promote the same agenda, but they all promote each other.
Right.
And so I've got Black Rifle Coffee. I mean, nobody's got any questions about that when it comes to me. I've been hounding on Black Rifle Coffee for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
When they're putting all of their money in advertising into the knife industry and into racing and into sports and into other stuff right after they incorporate, and they start being involved, you start seeing these businesses here, and these people and these heroes, and they're all connected. They don't all have to push the same agenda or anything like that, but they all support each other. And now where I get into, the theory, and Sean Ryan mentioned working for the CIA and running drugs out of South America, all of the people in prison and everything like that, our government is bringing those drugs into our country, and they are using that drug money, that laundered drug money, to fund fascist terrorists out of South America. That is a fact at this point. It is not a conspiracy theory. It has been revealed. It is documented. It is a fact. But those Nazis are dying. They're not good terrorists anymore. They're 90 years old. So now we've got the Taliban, and now we've got synthetic drugs, and cocaine isn't the industry it used to be when we had fentanyl and everything else. And it's getting really hard to fund terrorism with laundered money through drugs or these other things, because we live in a world that's been decentralized. But what if I can sell a bag of coffee for 3 times the price and sell absolutely as much as we can make all day, every day? It looks legit. It's the same thing that the mafia did. It's the same crap. It's just the mafia.
Yeah.
So
I think that's super interesting, and you definitely you've caused me to re-examine some of my views on some of that, right? And I want to keep digging into it.
It's hard. I don't even know if it's worth it. I mean, I would just tell people, like, maybe just believe what you can prove with your own 2 eyes at this point.
I think that sort of that goes to kind of what we've been talking about this whole conversation, is educating yourself in a thoughtful and diligent way, right? On everything, whether it has to do with steels or edge geometry, or the agendas, the hidden agendas, if they exist behind the people that you're hearing from every day and seeing every day online, right?
I mean, who's to say MagnaCut is not really MagnaCut? MagnaCut is just a steel we already know,
right?
And they're just slapping MagnaCut on there, and there you go.
Well, and that's actually real. Also, with the Vasco series of knives, Vasco wear, Vasco die. The Vasco series of steels was, I believe, designed in the 60s or 70s. CPM 3V, CPM 1V, crew wear, Z-Tough, CD #1. These steels, they all have existed. And then crucible, powder metallurgy was a real step forward. We take these existing knife recipes, like a food recipe, and we make them profitable. It's not a bad thing at all. No. I mean, if I can take a food recipe, add some modern tech, and make it a new thing, more power to you. You invested in making that happen. That's great. But yeah, like, I would say 98% of our new knife steels and newer stuff, it's already always existed. It just hasn't been readily available.
Right. That makes
So,
sense.
Hey, I think probably a good time to wrap up.
yeah.
Unless you've got something more you want to talk about. If people want to check out your knives, how do they check them out? Where do they go?
So, I've got exodusknifeandtool.com, but I've got Instagram, I've got Facebook, I've got an X kind of. But the best way to get a hold of me, because I'm not allowed to do very much on social media, is I've got a email subscription list and I've got a blog, and honestly, the blog is probably the best way, because I've even had.
Do you run that off your site? Is that blog off your
Just
site?
exodusknifeandtool.com. I've got a blog on there, and I try and keep that updated, keep people up to speed there. I barked at some CIA guys that didn't appreciate it. I got doxxed, and I got a whole bunch of fake email subscriptions on my email subscription list. If that happens to you, when you send them this email, they just got to report it as spam, and boom, you got no more email list anymore.
Oh,
so
man.
the best way is probably the blog at this point.
That's
Yeah.
interesting. I didn't know that happened to you.
Well, when you want to think about how
that.
to screw somebody else's business and family, and you can get a little creative, there's a lot of things you can do. You just have to be a dirtbag.
Yeah.
To even think about them.
Well, there are dirtbags out there. You got to look out for them.
So, man, it's been fantastic. I think we should do it again. I've really enjoyed my time with you guys, and we'll see how things go with Crucible. I don't know if you guys want to talk about it. Did you mention that you're working on a bird and trout pretty soon?
Well, it's my brother's project, really.
This, right? The reason why I started making knives, probably you too, is trying to find the knife that you want. And so for 15 years, I've been designing like the perfect EDC for me. And it's based on a bird and trout. So that's sort of what I'm going for. But yeah, we have that and about 4 or 5 other designs that are in the process as a,
those fall mostly in the
we've got a whole bunch of categories coming out, but we take our time. We really we get on each other's case about you can rush, but you don't put it out until it's ready. You just don't. And
you can go fast, but you can't rush.
Yeah. So it's taking us longer than probably most people would, or a lot of companies would, because we like to look at ourselves in the mirror and be able to say, hey, you're not just trying to sell something. You're trying to actually give somebody value for their money and be paid for it. But so we've got some cool ones coming out. They're pretty close. This next year we'll have quite a few, I think, new models. So we'll definitely want some of your input on it, because we have similar philosophies, I think, of knives and knife making, although our details are quite different. And I find it really interesting. So I really like some of the feedback you've given me on my knives in the past. So we'll be doing that again.
And if we make a MagnaCut version of this Beckwith Covert, you'll be one of the first to get one.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Because it'll perform better.
Guys. Yeah. I love what you guys are doing. I hope you keep it up. And as soon as something happens, you guys want to talk again, you just let me know. I'd love
we'll do it. Let's totally do it again.
Yeah, we'll have
we got more to talk about.
For sure.
All right, Jacob. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me. Have a good night.
See ya.